Well, folks, we're back with another Festival of Legends card review, and we've got a sick-looking Death Knight Legendary, along with some support cards, hunter cards, and warrior cards. Boy, we got a lot to talk about warrior cards. But this is Cagehead, and he looks so freaking sick. The legendary musician for Death Knight. He is an 8-mana 5/1. He's a double unholy, so not a ton of flexibility here, but a little. And he's got a Death Rattle, summon a 9/9 Blight Boar with charge and taunt. And there's your big old Blight Boar. That looks super sick as well. Blight Boar being the name of the band and now this awesome minion. It's 9/9 with charge and taunt, undead beast, as you see. And in particular, this being a Death Rattle might seem like a downside. It's like, hey, I just want my charge and my taunt right away. But in particular, you're going to note there are some Death Rattle-y synergy cards also coming alongside this that we're going to talk about. Perhaps manipulating and utilizing this Death Rattle in some really beneficial ways. Also, that dude's awesome. That is me. If I everybody says I'm a dwarf, but I'm actually a giant panda. That's absolutely me if I'm a Hearthstone card. So let's talk about this, right? So you play this out on turn 8 just as is. It was just a naked minion with no additional support. Probably honestly wouldn't be that exciting. It is nice though that they gave the Blight Boar taunt, so that if you do have to just play this out on 8, your opponent has this real dilemma. It's like, oh man, I kind of have to kill this, because if not, they're gonna get this like crazy efficient trade with a 5/1, and I'm still gonna take 9/9 to the face. So it's like, well, I gotta kill it, but then there's also this Blight Boar I've got to work through as well. Creates some real friction around decision making there, just how they handle the just plopped down Cagehead. And in particular, once they know these cards exist, if they don't kill the Cagehead, then they're gonna get punished by all these crazy Death Rattle synergy cards. So they probably have to kill this off and deal with the Blight Boar because it has taunt. So really, really cool that they gave it taunt. That's the important part of that conversation. Now, you're probably not just plopping this down on turn 8. You're probably using this to set up, for instance, with a Death Growl, or of course, if you've already played a Construct Quarter, the Death Knight location we all know, and many of us probably hate, that will destroy a minion and summon a 4/5 with Rush. So you can have that set up and ready to go on turn 8. Play your Cagehead, kill it off immediately, get the 9/9 Blight Boar, slam it to face, maybe for lethal, frankly, at that stage, just making this a kind of finisher style card, or, you know, run it to face, use the 4/5 trade in, and set up for, you know, your Bone Shredder later. This allows you to gain the Death Rattle of your Cagehead, so you can get another Blight Boar basically right off the back of that if you want to, if this is perhaps your only Death Rattle in the deck, which may not be the case with Unholy Death Knight. You might want more than that. But also, you know, you can wait till turn 9 or something and play a Cagehead with perhaps some other minions that were left behind, and then use Death Growl to get multiple Cagehead Death Rattles active as well. So obviously a handful. Oh, and you can also just use the Mosh Pit as well to give to give the Cagehead Reborn as well. So you can actually have both your locations up, give it Reborn, then destroy it with Construct Quarter and have another Cagehead, right? You maybe need to then like Death Growl that, or you know, activate it somehow, I don't know. But basically chains of Death Rattles and Blight Boars going off the back of all these effects. The exact ordering and sequencing and combinations are going to largely depend on your hand at the time, game state, and perhaps the shape of your deck. But clearly, as you can see, when all of this starts to come together, there's a lot of potential to both get some immediacy out of this effect, like crazy big lethal pushes and so on, but also perhaps repeating long-term value off of some of these Death Rattles as well. Just summoning like Blight Boar after Blight Boar, which eventually, of course, that's going to overwhelm your opponent with just raw damage, given the fact that it has charge. So yeah, I mean, this looks like a really cool setup minion. 8 mana is getting pretty expensive in the world of legendaries, but I think this has enough threat and lethality baked into it and enough synergy potential that you are going to be willing to spend 8 mana. In other words, I think this looks like a pretty good card. So next up here, let's talk about Mosh Pit. This is a new 2 mana location. It's 2 durability as well, and you can spend 3 corpses to give a friendly minion reborn. So as we talked about, obviously with Cagehead, that's going to feel pretty good if you get to turn 8. Now theoretically, of course, you could use this on smaller minions earlier in the game as well. Certainly at least the first activation of this, you're running it in a Cagehead deck, but might exist outside of Cagehead decks as well, just giving some higher value cards with nice death rattles, whatever it might be, that extra oomph with Reborn. Now I will say I kind of think the 3 corpse requirement on this one feels a little hefty. That's not a cheap requirement. We do know there's some things that kind of reward spinning corpses, so maybe certain decks that need other ways to spin corpses could utilize something like Mosh Pit as another way to do that, but I don't know, sometimes this is going to be really hard to activate early in the game if you're spending some of your early game mana on the Mosh Pit itself. Maybe you haven't had that much time to accrue that many corpses, so this could have a bit of a delayed payoff, basically, where you're really only able to utilize this perhaps around the mid game. And then is that reborn aspect going to be worth it, just kind of sitting there waiting maybe until your Cagehead or whatever really big play you have? It is nice that you can hit big stuff with it, so maybe that'll overwhelm sort of the inefficiencies in regards to the early game plays and the corpse expenditures, but it does make me a little bit nervous in regards to this card's flexibility. I feel like it's probably limiting itself from really high tempo decks. They may not have time to plop this down. Spending this much mana and requiring this many corpses might be a limiter for some of the faster decks out there. So this may restrict itself to a narrower style of decks that need that payoff later in the game, which will definitely cut down its utility a fair bit. So next up here is the Death Growl. This is a 1 mana spell, single unholy, so a lot of flexibility there for runes. And this one allows you to choose a minion and then spread its death rattle to adjacent minions, which that alone is pretty scary with Cagehead, as we saw. Like, clearly spreading this death rattle around is gross. If you have any minions left behind going into like turn 9 or whatever, you could play a Cagehead and spread its death rattle to the 2 adjacent minions and then trade those in, and basically you've got multiple blight boars there. You could even do it twice, I guess, on 10 mana too, giving you like 4 blight boars that are ready to attack face. So basically clean up minions against any Death Knights that might have a Cagehead and a Death Growl. Now, again, of course, you don't always want to wait till turn 10 to play your card. So is this still useful in the early game for Death Knight? And yeah, I think so. I think there's enough interesting death rattles floating around that this will feel worth it. One interesting thing I was thinking about, this doesn't say friendly minions. So you could even use this on like your opponent's minions with a Blightfang or something, like Blightfang their minions and then spread their death rattles that give you the 2/2 zombies to their adjacent minions, right? So that's kind of an interesting line, but Death Knight has plenty of other death rattles of their own that they might be interested in copying. You know, just card draw off, like a Chill Fallen Baron, for instance, or something. Could be a reasonable way to use the Death Growl here if you've got some small minions running around. And certainly in unholy builds, the likelihood of having a fairly wide board of small minions and a death rattle here and there to synergize with them seems pretty high. And I like how cheap this spell is. It's so efficient that you have to imagine it's going to feel worth it to weave into some turns. I'm kind of even wondering if there's any really weird shenanigans you could do with something like Deathbringer Sourfang, where you give his death rattle to other minions and then you can return them to hand and play them for health. Like, I don't know what's broken there, but maybe something's broken there. I'm curious. I don't know that they would retain that death rattle for the future, but still, I don't know, something interesting to think about. But basically, because this card is so cheap and so flexible, it feels like it might have a lot of those angles and plays that can do some pretty silly stuff. So absolutely looks like a really high utility card with a lot of potential power. And then finally for Death Knight here, we have the Bone Shredder. This is a 5 mana single unholy. 5/4 undead. Undead Panda is really sick, by the way. Battle Cry, spend 5 corpses to trigger and gain the death rattle of a random friendly minion that died this game. So obviously, if you have only Cagehead in your deck as a death rattle, this is completely nutso. This would trigger the Blightboar death rattle, instantly giving you a 9/9. And it would also gain the Blightboar death rattle as well, so some potential there for later. If that somehow is not enough to kill your opponent, you can play 2 of these and get 2 Blightboars right away. So really cool. Now, notably, of course, that would have to come down pretty late in the game, and you'd have to build your deck in a really specific way. That said, I don't think you'd have to necessarily for this card. I think this is a pretty good effect. It does have the high corpse requirement. That's a little bit tough sometimes. That is a lot of corpses to spend. But if you're running some solid death rattles in the early to mid game, this has a nice base stat total. It's getting that death rattle instantly and the bonus too. So it's kind of doubling up on the death rattle. So any reasonably sized death rattle is going to feel pretty efficient, I think, here with the Bone Shredder. You know, this could easily be like a 5/4 that draws 2 cards, which perhaps that's not not that exciting, you know, but there are probably some more tempo based versions as well that feel good. And of course you could rely on neutral death rattles as well, but some crazy potential there with Cage Head, and I think pretty reasonable baseline expectations as well for this card on curve makes this one look pretty good. So next up, let's move on over to Warrior, who got 3 cards revealed last night, and since then there has been a lot of discourse around these Warrior cards and the frustration around these Warrior cards due to their perceived power level being rather low. And I don't really disagree to some extent. We're gonna add a little nuance to that conversation, hopefully, but I can feel and understand that frustration. So these are the riffs. There's Bridge Riff, there's Chorus Riff, and there's Verse Riff. They each have a base effect and then a finale bonus. And when that finale bonus connects, it will play the previously played riff. So you're going to have kind of a base riff to kick off the chain, and then any future riff will get that extra effect. And it has been confirmed the first riff will never have a bonus. It's not like it doubles itself or anything like that to get things started. So the first riff is always just a base effect. So you might have to play like a really bad verse riff early in the game to get it started. This is just like a worse claw. You know, it's not going to feel good to play the first one. But then hopefully the next riffs start to feel good. Now, of note is the fact that there's only ever going to be 2 effects per riff. It's not going to create a chain where your previous riff also finales off of your previous riff, and so on and so forth, right? So the replayed riff basically never gets its finale. So there's only ever 2. So keep that in mind. I think some people thought there were going to be like a 5-card chain of riffs, which would probably make these nuts, but you know, that's not happening. It's this effect does not work on the replayed version. So in essence, what that means is your riffs are going to look like this. I mocked up a few that if their finale is active, these are kind of the combined effects. Of course, there's more permutations than this, but I just mocked up a few. So like, you know, this big riff might give you the 3/4 with taunt, the 4 through the rush, and give your hero +2 attack and 2 armor. So that's like a combined one. This one looks a little more insane. Give your hero +2 attack and gain 2 armor, summon a 3/4 taunt, and a 4/3 with rush. So if you have played like the 6-mana riff that gives you the minions, and then you followed up with this 2-mana riff, you're going to get some really cheap minions. It's actually going to feel pretty good. And I think it does help to look at these a little bit like this to really combine the effects down. It helps you realize that later in the riff chain, particularly if the previous riff is the 6-mana riff, there are some good plays, right? The 3 and 2-mana one summoning you these minions, that feels a little bit better. That feels good for its cost. Now, of course, it's not really that simple, and that's what most people have recognized, and that's where the frustration comes from, because you have to play this for 6 mana at some point, right? And even with the bonus effects on this big riff, it doesn't feel great for 6 mana. You're getting pretty late into a game at 6 mana, right? Your opponents are doing big things, and you're getting 2 medium-sized minions with very base keywords. You know, yeah, it's nice. They have some stats they can trade in or something right away, or the taunt might force their hand a little bit. But still, pretty middling stats, and the bonus effects on this one would be at that stage either Chorus Riff or Verse Riff, which are both pretty, you know, they're okay. You're not, again, though, playing much for tempo or really taking a swing on board. You know, oh, I got +2 attack to clear something tiny and 2 minions. Or like I drew a minion and gave it a hand buff. That's not going to help you keep up at all. So very often you're going to be spending this big 6-mana riff, and I think it's going to feel like you're behind in the game at that stage. I think that is going to be a turn where you start to fall behind. And then the question becomes like, okay, if I play a chorus riff later and I get an extra set of minions, is that enough to like recover? Is that going to be swingy? Is that going to help me get the game back on my side? And although in a vacuum, plays like this one or this one with these combined rift effects, in a vacuum, these look pretty good. I don't know that they're good enough, like on turn 7 or turn 8, to actually flip things back in your favor. At the end of the day, it's still 2 fairly small minions pretty dang late in the game. Your opponent is probably going to be able to sweep those up with some cheap removal, and it just, even though it's an efficient play, it may not be enough to start recovering the game. And also, there's not like a critical mass of these rifts achieved either. There's a limited number of them. You only have 3 times 2, so 6 total rifts. So you can't go absolutely crazy. And also you have to have drawn them all and have them ready to go, because otherwise the kind of rewards or payoffs aren't going to be coming quick enough in rapid enough succession, one after the other, to really make it feel worth it. So there's this kind of like, you got to have them all. There probably aren't quite enough. I haven't even mentioned the fact that you have to hit the finale on them, which is frankly not trivial, especially with some of these higher cost rifts like the bridge rift. Might be hard to weave this into a turn if you don't have a lot of like 1 mana cards floating around. Could be really tough to actually activate the finale. So there are basically all of these checks going into these rifts, which I think from a power level standpoint, frankly, aren't really rewarding enough to warrant all of those different checks. I mean, if they were super powerful rewards and effects, then yeah, maybe it would be worth it for all this setup and all of these checks and balances put in place. But I don't really feel like the rewards are super powerful. They're all fairly low tempo and efficient compared to similar effects. So what kind of deck is actually wanting to play these? Like, what deck is trying to run a couple minions on turn 6? What deck is looking to run this combination of effects? You know, it's not really feeling like an aggro deck. It's got some defensive stuff in there. It's, you know, it's got some hand buff and some like card draw here that's not super efficient. Like, I don't know where this lives. I don't know who's running this. I don't know how they're finding time to start playing all these. You've basically got like bad plays until the bridge riff, and you've got like one good play, and then the next one's not even good because you've lost your bridge riff again. So I just, like I said, I get it. I hopefully added some context. I hopefully added some detail and some nuance to the conversation instead of just warrior bad. But I kind of come to the same conclusion that these feel a little slow. Like I think you could probably chop a mana off of all of these and they wouldn't feel too crazy. My fear is that, you know, from a design standpoint, you look at this end result and you say, oh God, we can't make these too strong, right? Like this result is really powerful. I mean, if you do look at this card in a vacuum, that's obviously insane. But from a play experience standpoint, it takes a lot of time and a lot of work to get to this card. So would it be crazy if this was 1 mana on turn 7 or 8? I don't think so these days, right? There's a lot of powerful effects in Hearthstone. So, you know, listen, this is one of those that could surprise us. It could feel a lot better to play. You know, it's kind of got those like Demon Hunter Relic vibes, but that's actually a great comparison because these don't scale like the Demon Hunter Relics, right? Those got bigger every time you played one, and that's what helps is they start to snowball and accumulate into this really crazy, overwhelming efficiency. These don't do that. These don't scale. They're fixed in their effects. So they do feel kind of like a light relic package with no gigantic payoff, and boy, as such, man, they're pretty underwhelming. So yeah, I guess I understand it. I know I didn't really talk about these cards individually, but hopefully the conversation here was still helpful. This is really inefficient at base, low payoff late. This is fairly inefficient at a base. If you compare this to something like you know, a Bannerman for Paladin or whatever, that's like buffing your whole hand, drawing a minion, and it's on a stick. It's got a body. So this feels pretty inefficient by comparison, and this feels pretty inefficient at a base by comparison. But this is the one that would certainly feel the most rewarding on future rifts as well. So that's certainly a consideration. So there's your conversation about each of them individually, but ultimately as a package, I'm really doubtful, like many people. All right, so moving over to Hunter here, we've got this new kind of spell package. There's the Jungle Jammer, which will upgrade as you cast spells. We got the Arrow Smith. Music puns, very funny. Dude, that is actually pretty good. This is kind of a Flame Waker, like Lady Steno type card. And a couple kind of like triplet spells, like twin spells, but you get 3 total, which will summon you some monkeys and give you some bananas. So just wanted you to see all these before we start talking through these, since they do feed into each other pretty importantly. But let's kick it off with the Jungle Jammer here. So this is a 4-mana 4/2. It's going to summon you a random 1-cost beast, but you cast spells while equipped to improve it. As we saw, you're getting a bunch of repeatable cheap spells. So you like play this on turn 4, and then, you know, if your hand is perfect on turn 5, maybe you play like 2 monkeys and a banana, and, you know, you've cast 3 spells. You've attacked with this twice, so you summon a 4-cost beast. You've upgraded it 3 times. So boom. You get you a random 4-cost, a couple monkeys, and a little board buff, and this, of course, just kind of pushes 8 damage, which for Hunter, and some of these spell-based energy cards in combination with the Naga package from Hunter previously all have some ways to go face, so I think, you know, dealing 8 damage will probably feel a little bit appreciated there. Now, when it comes to random beasts of a given cost, you can't really expect the results to be great. You know, there's all kinds of Battlecry minions in the pool that aren't going to have great efficient stats. You're gonna hit some wonky stuff. You're not gonna have perfect spells. I'd say on average you're gonna get like a 3-cost beast that's probably not very useful. Just on, you know, maybe a 3/3 4/4 stat average here off the Jungle Jammer, which it's okay. Yeah, I mean, 8 damage is 8 damage. These 4/2 weapons have had some success certainly in the history of Hearthstone. But it's not going to be the most powerful play here. I don't think this is the reason you're really excited to run this spell package. And I suspect there will be some scenarios too where this gets cut in favor of like more Naga consistency, or, you know, just more resource generation or something for a card here that's just, I think, middling at best. I don't think it's terrible. It's fine. So this is one of those particularly early in the rotation, like we say every time. I know every card review, blah blah blah, but you know, lower power level cards can get run in those scenarios. So this might get played early on in its lifespan and then, you know, kind of get forgotten about for a little while, but certainly a serviceable fine card for now. So moving on here to the Arrowsmith. This is a new 2-mana 2/3 Naga. After you cast a spell, deal 1 damage to the lowest health enemy. So we've got this spell-based trigger. It's kind of like Lady Steno, I think, most recently for Demon Hunter with that lowest health enemy consideration. But Lady Steno was 3 mana and dealt 2 damage and could be scaled, of course. You could buff Lady Steno and then get extra damage out of it, which gave it this crazy lethality. I'd also say Demon Hunter had access to some great 0-mana spells to support that, things like Predation. So, you know, that felt awesome and game-winning and kind of build-around worthy. And this feels worse. I don't think it's terrible by any means. As I mentioned earlier, we've still got that Naga package for Hunter floating around from Sunken City, and this kind of slots into that. There's some other stuff like Raj Nazjan or whatever. You know, he kind of duplicates your spell cost as face damage, that sort of thing. So there are definitely some plays to support this and some packages that this goes in, but I don't think this is like the big crazy payoff again that's worth it. This is more just a building block, more support. It's kind of worse than other examples of cards, despite being a little bit cheaper than some of those cards. I'm not sure this really feels worth it in that regard. So, you know, yes, this plus a couple bananas is like, yeah, okay, tidies the board up a little bit, maybe pings off some small minions or whatever, but no crazy face damage hits, no real raw efficiency of damage output in this one compared to some of its peers like that Flame Waker. There's even that like Death Knight card that does something similar to this, which doesn't even get played that much, but I think that does 2 damage to random enemies. The lowest health part here kind of helps sometimes hit good targets or consistent targets, but still, again, I think this card's fine. It's solid. It might get played in a spell-based package early, or probably will. I think this spell-based package will feel like a complementary piece of some kind of facey, more aggressive Hunter build. But this is not going to feel like the standout card. It's just going to feel solid, maybe a little bit better than the weapon there, but nothing crazy as far as I'm concerned on this one. So next up here we have the Barrel of Monkeys, and if we had twin spell in the past, this is kind of a triplet spell, because you can get 3 of them in total. So you play one, you have 2 monkeys left. You play the second one, you have 1 monkey left. That's your final play. Each of them summoning you a Silverback Patriarch for only 2 mana. He is really power crept once again this time, so directly, but at least he's a part of it. You know, he gets to be a part of it. And you know what? I think this card's pretty solid. I'm going to be honest. Yes, I know a Silverback Patriarch has been memed on a lot, but for 2 mana, I think it feels a lot better. It's one of those just speed bump cards, gets bodies in play. It does it very efficiently. You're not sacrificing, a lot of card advantage or resources with this one, because you're getting so much out of this single card. Kind of gets slotted into turns, gets in the opponent's way, gives you beast synergies, gives you bodies on board for buffs. It just feels good, I think, to slot this into turns, especially if you're proccing some other sort of spell benefit on top of it as well, and using it as fuel for these other engines. So I think this could be, again, a solid card in this spell-based package, but I actually think this could exist beyond that as well. I think you could play this in some beast decks, stuff that maybe even wants to go wide on board. This isn't particularly inefficient in that regard. So I actually think the Barrel of Monkeys has a chance to escape its spell synergies here and move beyond that. It's just a really efficient play. It's not super high power level necessarily, but from a card advantage standpoint, it preserves a lot of resources while still getting in your opponent's way with all these patriarchs. So I'm excited to say I'm pretty hopeful for the Barrel of Monkeys. And then finally for Hunter here, we have the Bunch of Bananas. This is another of the triplet spells, we'll call them. This time you're just getting +1/+1 buffs off of these bananas. And yeah, again, this is fuel, right? You plop down an Aerosmith and you play a couple bananas on it. You've got yourself a nice little minion that you can hopefully invest in for multiple turns if it lives. It's pretty shaky, which again is part of the problem, I think, for this sort of stuff. It's a little too easily dealt with perhaps, but you can still have yourself a decent turn there. Get some stats on board, get some spell procs, hit your jungle jammer up a little bit to make it better, right? So it's all starting to come together. Now, that said, I do think this is a little bit less efficient than the Barrel of Monkeys from a resource standpoint. Like, pretty easy still to dump all of this out of hand and maybe not really have achieved all that much. Like, yeah, getting some buffs on early aggressive minions can feel good, but this is gonna run you out of gas pretty quickly. Unlike, I think, the Barrel of Monkeys, which can stretch a little bit further. So I don't think this one has as much opportunity to escape this spell synergy package, but still, again, fine fuel for that. So these cards all feel pretty similar to me as solid short-term options that are probably going to fall off later as more and more cards come along that are stronger. But I do think the Barrel of Monkeys could persist a bit more. I have some hope for this one. Cagehead is a 4-star card. Mosh Pit is a 3-star card. Death Growl is a 4-star card. Bone Shredder is a 3-star card. Bridge Riff is a 2-star card. Chorus Riff is a 2-star card. Verse Riff is a 2-star card. Jungle Jammer is a 3-star card. Aerosmith is a 3-star card. Barrel of Monkeys is a 4-star card. Bunch of Bananas is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. What do you think about Cagehead? What do you think about the Warrior cards? I want to hear all that and more. But until then, thanks so much for watching. And until next time, game on.